The stagecoach was 3 hours late, and Silas Cade told himself he did not care. He stood outside the small station at Copper Creek, his back pressed against a weathered wooden post, staring at the empty road that cut through the Montana Valley like a scar. October wind pushed against his coat and carried the sharp promise of winter. He had lived on his mountain for 12 years. He had survived storms that tore roofs from barns and cold that cracked bone. A woman stepping off a stagecoach would not change anything. That was what he believed. Inside the station, men laughed over tobacco and cards. Silas did not join them. He stayed outside, alone with the wind. In his gloved hand, he held a photograph worn soft at the edges. The woman's face had faded to gray from years of being folded and unfolded. He did not look at it now, and he did not need to. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon. The groan of wheels reached him first, then the shape of the coach appeared against the pale sky. Silas straightened, but did not move forward. His fingers tightened around the photograph. The coach stopped. The door opened. A woman stepped down. She carried one battered valise. Mud darkened the hem of her dress from the long journey. Her hat was plain, her coat simple wool. She looked smaller than he expected. Not fragile, just quiet. Her eyes found him at once. They held. She did not smile. Neither did he. Silas stepped forward and took her valise without speaking. It was lighter than he expected. 2 hours later, they were riding the narrow trail up toward his cabin. She sat behind him on the horse, careful not to touch him, as the wind carried the scent of pine and the coming snow. He did not speak once. The cabin came into view as the sun dropped behind the ridge. Weathered logs, one window catching the last orange light, smoke stains climbing the chimney. No curtains, no garden, no sign that a woman had ever lived there. Silas swung down and tied the horse. He lifted her valise again and walked inside without looking back. The door scraped across the floor as she followed him. One room, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with tins and jars arranged with careful precision. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary, nothing soft. "Your room's through there," he said, pointing toward a narrow door. "I sleep in the loft." She nodded once. "You handle the cooking in the house," he continued. "I handle everything outside." He crouched by the stove and fed kindling into its cold belly. The fire caught slowly. Light crept up the walls. She opened her valise. From inside, she pulled a folded piece of white linen embroidered with small yellow daisies. The edges were worn thin from years of washing. She spread it across the rough pine table without a word. Silas stood. His eyes moved to the cloth. Something shifted in his jaw, a muscle tightening, then easing. He said nothing. Supper was beans and hard bread. They sat across from each other with the tablecloth between them, like a question neither knew how to ask. When he finished eating, he rinsed his plate in the bucket and climbed the ladder to the loft without another word. Clara sat alone by the fire. Later that night, she wrote a letter by lamplight, her handwriting even and steady. From the loft above, Silas watched through a narrow gap in the floorboards. Her hand moved across the page with practiced ease. Too practiced for a simple widow, he thought. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that did not need explaining. Clara rose before dawn, when frost covered the inside of the window glass. She built the fire, ground the coffee, wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders. By the time Silas climbed down from the loft, the cabin was warm. He never thanked her, but he never left without drinking a full cup. She learned his habits without asking. The left peg for his coat, the way he checked the door latch twice each night, the way he never began eating until she sat down. even if his plate was already full. Silence filled the cabin, but it was not cruel. It was careful. Yet then the first snow came early. By afternoon, the world outside had turned white. By evening, the wind screamed against the walls. Silas had left at dawn to check the fence line. Clara kept the fire burning, reheated water, ground fresh coffee beans, waited. The clock ticked past 6. Then Evan. The door burst open at last, and Silas stumbled inside in a gust of snow, his shoulders white, his beard crusted with ice. She saw it at once. The slight hitch in his step, the way his right shoulder sagged lower than the left. He was hurting. She poured hot coffee into a tin cup and held it out. Their fingers brushed. Both went still. "You didn't have to wait up," he said. "I wasn't waiting," she replied, steady as stone. "Just not sleepy." He drank long and slow, letting the heat sink into him. "Coffee's good," he said quietly. It's been on the stove a while." "I know." For the first time since the station, he truly looked at her. Something in his eyes cracked, thin as ice before it breaks. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire burned warm. And between them, in the quiet, something shifted. The storm did not end that night. It howled against the cabin until the windows rattled and the roof groaned under the weight of snow. Silas lay awake in the loft, staring into the dark. Below him, he could hear Clara moving once, then settling again in her narrow bed. He had not meant to look at her the way he had. He had not meant to feel that crack in his chest. But it was there. Before dawn, he rose quietly and climbed down the ladder. His leg protested as his boots hit the floor. He moved to the stove and struggled with the coffee pot one-handed. But the pain in his right shoulder flared sharp when he reached too far. "I can do that," Clara said softly from the doorway. "I've got it." "You don't." She crossed the room and took the pot from him. He let her. That was the first thing that changed. He let her. The cabin filled with the smell of coffee. Pale morning light crept through the window, turning the snow outside pink and gold. She poured his cup and set it before him. Her hands were steady. "There's liniment in my valise," she said. "Camphor and coal oil. It helps with stiffness." "I'm fine." "I know." She turned back to the stove. He said nothing. But that evening, when she returned from the woodshed, the bottle was half empty on the table. Days slipped into weeks. The snow deepened. As the world shrank to white silence and the small circle of warmth inside the cabin, Clara carried water, chopped kindling, and learned the slope of the land. Silas watched her move through his space as if she had always belonged there. She restacked the woodpile one afternoon while he was out. Heavy logs at chest height, kindling near the door, order where there had been none. "You moved the wood," he said that night. "It was a mess." It was fine. "Now it's better." He studied her a long moment. Then he nodded once. Later that week, the wobble in her chair disappeared. She ran her fingers under the seat and found fresh-cut wood fitted clean and tight beneath the leg. "Chair's fixed," she said. "It was crooked." It was fine. "Well," she replied softly. Now it's better." Something close to a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The first real fracture came 3 days before Christmas. Clara was sweeping near the ladder when the broom caught on something tucked against the wall. A small wooden box. Plain pine. Dark with age. She should have left it. She opened it instead. Inside was a photograph in a cracked brass frame. A young woman with serious eyes, a gold ring, and a folded letter worn thin at the creases. Clara closed the lid and pushed the box back into the shadows. She did not mention it. But that night, Silas felt it. He moved differently, kept his eyes on his plate, climbed to the loft before the fire burned low. A door had closed again, and Clara could see it. On the third night, the silence broke. They sat across from each other, and the fire casting red light across the walls. Silas was sharpening his knife. The scraping sound filled the room. Then it stopped. Her name was Eliza. Clara did not look up. February of 70, he continued. Bad winter. She took sick. I rode down for medicine. Storm came in. 3 days before I got back. The knife slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. When I got here, he said, voice rough, she was gone. The fire popped. Wind pressed against the glass. 12 years, he whispered. Figured if I didn't let anyone in, I couldn't lose anyone again. Clara set her mending aside. My husband didn't hit me, she said quietly. Didn't yell. Didn't drink. He just didn't see me. 5 years in that house, and I might as well have been a ghost. Silas lifted his eyes. When he died, she went on, I felt nothing, but that scared me more than grief. The fire burned low between them. That's why I answered your advertisement, she said. I wanted to feel like a person again. Silas stared at her across the flames. I see you, he said. The words hung in the air. The way you move the wood so I don't strain. The way you heat the coffee 3 times. I see you. Her breath caught, but she did not speak. The next morning, he was gone before dawn. Clara woke to the sound of the door closing. She rushed to the window. His figure moved toward the ridge in brutal cold, checking the fence line where posts had begun to lean. The temperature had dropped hard overnight. She pulled on her boots and ran after him. She found him a 1/4 mile from the cabin. The ridge had given way. Rocks had broken loose and carried him down the slope. His right leg was pinned between 2 boulders at an angle that made her stomach turn. Clara, he rasped. She dropped to her knees beside him. His pulse was weak, his skin ice cold. She braced her shoulder against the larger rock and pushed with everything she had. It did not move. Again, he whispered. They counted together. On 3, she shoved and he pulled. A sound tore from his throat as his leg came free. The rock settled back with a grinding thud. She dragged him through the snow. 2 hours. Through wind and ice and rising light. Her lungs burned. Her arms shook. But she did not stop. Inside the cabin, she rebuilt the fire and cut away his trouser leg. The bone pressed wrong beneath swollen skin. She tore her calico dress into strips and bound splints tight. She gave him laudanum in small drops, but she held him through the worst of it while he cursed and groaned and trembled. The weeks that followed stripped him bare. He could not stand, could not walk, could barely sit without pain draining the color from his face. Clara did everything. Water, food, wood, bandages. He snapped at her the first few days. I can do it myself. You can't. Leave me be. No. She never argued. She just kept coming back. By the 3rd week, he began saying thank you. One night, she fell asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand wrapped around his. When he woke before dawn, she was still there. He lay watching her breathe, the firelight soft on her face. For the first time in 12 years, the thought of being alone frightened him more than any storm. He did not let go of her hand. 8 weeks after the accident, Silas could stand with the help of a cane he had carved himself. Walking was slow and painful, but he refused to stay in bed. The mountain had taken enough from him. He would not let it take his pride. Clara watched him from the stove one late February afternoon as he practiced crossing the room without leaning too heavily on the cane. Each step cost him. She could see it in the tightness of his jaw. But he kept going. That was when they heard the horses. More than one. The sound carried clearly through the cold air, hooves muffled by snow, but steady and deliberate. Clara's hand froze around the wooden spoon. Silas turned toward the door, instinct sharp despite the weakness in his body. "Get the rifle," he said quietly. Clara moved without hesitation. She lifted the Winchester from above the door and placed it in his hands. His grip trembled. He braced the stock against his thigh to steady it. 3 riders emerged from the trees. The man in front wore a bowler hat and a coat too fine for the mountain. A gold watch chain glinted at his vest. The 2 behind him hung back, hired muscle by the look of them. "Mr. Cade," the man called, swinging down from his horse. "Harlan Crane, Northern Pacific Railroad." Silas knew the name. He had burned the letter months ago. "I'm not selling," Silas said. Crane smiled thinly. "I'm afraid this isn't a sale. The territorial government has authorized acquisition of rights-of-way. Your land sits directly in the path of the new rail spur. I've got deeds." Crane unfolded a document sealed with blue ink. "According to our records, Mr. Cade, your federal registration was never properly filed. Right, without proof of legal heirs or continuous claim, the land reverts to public domain." Silas tried to step forward. His bad leg buckled. The rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. He hit his knees hard, then his hands. Pain shot through him. Worse than pain was the humiliation. He could feel Crane watching. "Perhaps," Crane said softly, "you should sit down." Before Silas could force himself upright, Clara stepped out onto the porch. "My husband will stand when he's ready," she said calmly. Crane blinked. "Your husband?" "Silas Cade," she replied. "We were married in Hamilton County, Ohio. I have the certificate inside if you'd like to see it." The smile faltered. Silas pulled himself up with the door frame. His body shook, but he was standing. Clara stepped down from the porch and faced Crane squarely. You mentioned legal heirs," she continued. "That would be me." Crane recovered quickly. "That will need verification." "Of course," she said. "And while we're verifying, perhaps we should discuss the seal on that document." Crane stiffened. "Federal seals have been printed in red ink since 1875, Clara said evenly. "Yours is blue." The hired men exchanged glances. Crane's voice lost its smoothness. "You're mistaken." "I worked in a law office for 5 years, Clara replied. "Land disputes, railroad cases. I am not mistaken." Silence stretched across the clearing. Crane mounted his horse abruptly. "We'll return with proper authority." "Do," Clara said. "We'll be ready." They rode away without another word. Silas leaned heavily against the doorframe, his face flushed with shame and fury. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." They rode to town 2 days later. The courtroom was crowded. Crane stood at a polished table beside 2 lawyers. Judge Brennan listened with bored authority as arguments were presented. Crane claimed improper registration. Clara presented the original deed, the county filing, and a telegraph copy of the federal registration obtained from Helena. Crane protested forgery. Clara laid the false document before the judge and pointed to the blue seal. The room shifted. Then one of Crane's hired men stepped forward. "My name's Tom Garvey," he said, voice shaking. "He paid me to stamp those papers." The courtroom erupted. Judge Brennan ordered an investigation and suspended all railroad claims until further notice. Silas retained his land. Outside the courthouse, The cold air felt different. Silas stood still, absorbing it. "You knew," he said to Clara. "I suspected," she replied. "You needed someone on your side." He had never had that before. They returned to the mountain as the last of winter loosened its grip. April came with melting snow and the murmur of the creek waking again. The cabin no longer felt like a fortress. It felt lived in. One evening, Silas asked her to sit with him on the porch. The sky burned pink and gold over the ridge. The snow retreated to the highest peaks. The valley below showed hints of green. 12 years, he said quietly. I told myself I was strong because I was alone. Clara watched the light fade. I was just scared, he admitted. Scared of losing someone again. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small carving. At a mountain bluebird, wings delicate, smooth beneath her fingers. I don't have a ring, he said. Buried the last one with her. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm asking you to stay. Clara looked at the bird, at the mountain, at the man beside her who had learned finally that strength was not the same as solitude. I've been staying, she said softly, since the first night I kept the coffee warm. He let out a breath that felt like 12 years leaving his chest. They sat there as stars appeared overhead. He did not kiss her. He did not make promises. He simply held her hand. The cabin behind them was no longer just his. It was theirs. And when she rose to go inside, she paused at the doorway. Tomorrow, she said, I'll make the coffee. A small smile touched his mouth. I know, he replied. I'll wait.